Good morning again, everybody. I'm never going to make you do that twice. That was sad, but there's coffee in the lobby, okay? If you need it, get it. I will not be offended. You can still hear me from there. I promise I'll be loud. So, we just wrapped up Thanksgiving. I somehow did not eat pumpkin pie, and that is a disappointment to me, so I plan on getting some somewhere today. But in all of that, we are in James still, and you're like, Matt, it's the Christmas season. Frankly, we do the 2 weeks leading up, go into the Christmas Eve service and celebrate the birth of Christ. If we do it longer than that, you're going to hear me say the same thing about the wise men every year, so we're trying to just do sermon series a bit leading up, but this one happens to tie in well with where we're at. I didn't plan this, so Good Friday could have just, or Black Friday just happened, but it did, and of course I'll mention it. So where we're at in James, we are picking back up in James chapter 4. Next week will be 5, then I promise right into Christmas time, focusing on that beauty and the sorrows surrounding the truth of our King's birth. But last week we saw in James chapter 3 that thanks to the finished work of Christ on the cross, we can mature in how we speak, bringing about healthy community in Him. So much about the power of the tongue and how we speak. He's going to roll right off of that in a minute. But today we are going to see that our God is calling us to escape a worldwide belief system that personal satisfaction and financial security will satisfy us, which is an odd thing to preach right after Black Friday. This is not a condemnation. If you found good deals and got good deals, good job. This is in any way like money's bad, don't have it. That's not what James is trying to get at. But this call of coming close to God is the center of what James wants to teach us this morning. But before we get there, I want to remind us the very beginning of James starts with the letters to the Jews that are in the dispersion. So it's saying, hey, in all the Roman Empire, which they've taken over most of the town, most of the countries, we're in charge now. Most of you Jews that are spread throughout here, I'm going to tell you some true things about how now to follow Jesus. But they had shared stories, something we miss more and more and more, especially in the modern era. Growing up, having a family story and a shared identity of who you are was through a story of your tribe and your people group. And now, thanks to the internet, you can find your tribe and people group on any weird section of 4chan and Reddit and create whole kinds of nightmares. But if you were writing to the Jews, they would have known so many things from the Old Testament, which they would have called it the Torah and the prophets and all these other things. But being born in that time, in that era, if you had been born into any family in the Roman Empire, there's an 80% chance you are living subsistence level, which means at any moment you can go into poverty and be destitute. Because there was about 20% of the people that had all the money and wealth, and everyone else was pretty much on that borderline of true poverty. And so their version of wealth was probably middle class today. So regardless of our finances, you would have grown up hearing these true stories from the Torah and the prophets. So today I want us to remember a bit of their flow of thought. Since last week, James talked about every kind of animal can be tamed and not making out our individual life any better with material things. And he has this idea of back to the garden almost in what he did. So I want to start back at the garden, because you've heard this a million times before, and the Jewish people would have known this to be true in their own hearts, is back in the day there was a garden. And then there was a man and woman living in the actual presence of God, and a serpent came and said, that one thing you can't have, God is keeping it from you. You can have power and all these great things for yourself if you will just selfishly take it and eat it, and they took the bait. And being allured by an independent and selfish confidence, the man and the woman, of course, took the bait and eat the fruit. And then if you've read that account before, you're like, well, it's Eve's fault. It says Adam who was with her. So that means Adam is sitting there staring at the weird thing, talking to him, going, happy wife, happy life, let's just do this. He fails on every account. It's according to Jesus, and everyone in the New Testament is by one man sin has entered the world, and by one man it is fixed. So it is not women's fault we fell, which I always have to highlight in this story. But as time went on, God's people fell, and out of that there's a prophecy in the moment that we fell and said, hey, childbirth is going to be a nightmare. You're going to have to work a lot harder for your food. Jesus is prophesied. It's saying there is coming a child that's going to crush the serpent's head and every system in the world and take over the place. But then God's people go on, and then they eventually get success and wealth and their own line of kings. Third time is the charm, but not in the case of the Jewish people, because their third king just runs the whole place into the ground. God gave Solomon exactly what he asked for, which was wisdom. James is a book about wisdom and seeking God and receiving it in how we speak and act and behave. But if you've ever read a Victorian-era classic, they just made another Frankenstein movie. The Victorian-era stories have stuck with us. But does anyone remember the adventure stories of King Solomon's mines that were just completely fabrications of history that had no bearing in reality? But the idea was we found the place where King Solomon got all his wealth and riches. He had a navy that had conquered the seas. And that doesn't sound that weird today because we have aircraft carriers. You can launch any kind of airplane you want in the ocean. But for a Jewish people to have a navy that could go conquer any riches and resources and bring it back, the ocean was a place of chaos and fear and turmoil. That's why I have the stories of Jonah that are true historical accounts of what God did. And we had conquered it all. We had all the wealth and riches in the world. But of course, the Jewish people know the kingdom ended in ruin because Solomon kept being greedy. But God had a plan for that family line since he had promising the king's father David that a king was coming that would change everything. And about 930 years later, after God himself goes radio silent for the last 400 of those years, a child was born that we're going to spend a really long time celebrating. And it's a beautiful part because the Jewish people knew these stories and they now have their king because these are believers who grew up Jewish. And as he grew, Jesus began to teach an awful lot about money. 40% of Jesus' parables, which are simply earthly stories with heavenly meanings, are about money. And then he also teaches 15% of everything he's taught. How many of you know that if you believe in God, repent in things, you're going to wind up in heaven, right? That's kind of the hope and expectation. One day we're united in God's presence just like it was in the garden. And Jesus is prophesying all these things, but he talks more about money than he talks about heaven, which is odd. And my wife is telling me to slow down, and she's right. But I'm trying to tell a long story quickly and all together, and then go slow down in the text. But that king talks about something odd because he's saying there's a great spiritual power that is in the world right now that we're going to focus on getting away from today. But we have a 57-second video clip that will explain what this king who had finally come warned all of us that applies to this message today.
Mammon. You are not able to serve God and mammon. Mammon refers to one's possessions like money, wealth, or property. In the New Testament, only Jesus uses the word mammon. He describes mammon as a burdensome ruler seeking to lure humans into its own control. Mammon comes from an Aramaic word, mammon, that means trustworthy. It's describing wealth as something that tempts you to trust in it for security and happiness, which it can't really give you in the long run. Jesus remained suspicious of mammon because of its tendency to tempt and corrupt us. But he also said that it can be used to help people. Instead of trusting in mammon, use it to generously care for others and build good relationships, which is gaining true wealth. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous mammon, who will entrust the true wealth to you?
Hopefully that with the visuals makes sense. But did everyone else see the shadow image offering you everything? I want us to get a little bit spookier and more spiritual in this concept because Jesus made it seem that way, right? There is a spiritual force in opposition to God that we are tempted to place our trust in. And give it 2,000 years, it really seems to have worked out for most of society. So mammon, this spiritual force we are bound to reckon with. Where does it fit into our story today? Well, as James is writing this letter, the early church had already entered into direct conflict with the unity of our king and the false hopes of mammon. We will see today in James that God is calling us to escape a worldwide belief system that personal satisfaction and financial security will save us. And to prove this point, we have to look everywhere in our story up until today in 2025 and even look to future truth happening in the book of Revelation to fully understand what God is calling us away from as he says, "Come close to me and I will come close to you." So let's dive into this conflict against mammon found in the early church that Jesus warned was coming. The serpent was crushed, but just like King Solomon, God's people are still really good at destroying things. So let's get into the first couple verses of James chapter 4. Because he's calling the church, he's saying, what is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it, so you fight and wage war to take it away from them. Yet you don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it. And even when you ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong. You want only what will give you pleasure. And that sounds really convicting, right? We just spent a lot of money on Black Friday. I am planning on eating more pumpkin pie soon. But James is pointing out that we should have a fear of missing out because of how we're praying, and is explaining to God in prayer what we plan on doing with things might prove helpful to us. Because he's saying everything you're asking for, you don't really stop and ask God. You're jealous and you fight and you don't want it. How many of you have found something to purchase for a loved one because the algorithm showed it to you on anything you has a screen on it now, right? You're like, that's a fantastic gift idea. One year, someone I was dating got me this coaster set that I thought was so cool because it lit up, and I'm just enough of a nerd that a light-up coaster set was like, this speaks to me. I think the phone was listening at the time because I was like, that's really cool, and I said it out loud, and it popped up on the person I was dating's feed, not mine, and then they're like, he would like that, and they bought it for me. That's how good the system is, and that was probably at least 12 years ago. It's only gotten better. And so when James is saying, hey, you're fighting, you're looking for all these things, that kind of rings true. But talking about prayer very briefly here, we put this on the church website because I think this is the best, easy explanation of prayer, even for children. According to Tim Keller, it says, prayer is continuing a conversation that God has started through His Word and His grace, which eventually becomes a full encounter with Him. And as today, the focal point of what James is saying is this drawing near to God, coming close to God. We can do that starting in prayer. But apparently the early church was trying to do what King Solomon had done, seeking selfishly to live in personal pleasure, and that whole, just saying it easier, it's an old word I'm trying to bring back called hedonism, living for your own personal pleasure. That's why most things exist. Most every influencer you will watch exists because people know if you give them money, they can have a good life. And we want a good life. But then it was tearing their church apart, and James uses really harsh language here because it's very likely no one was getting into literal fights. But how do we fit into this grand history that God is writing? Anybody remember how long Christendom itself lasted for? About 1,500 years of Western civilization and culture being based on the idea there is a God in heaven who has revealed Himself through His Word, became a person, and living in this manner. But what killed Christendom? Many factors, but do you think at any point people kind of got greedy? Do you think the fact that they called themselves the Roman Catholic Church and said, we need to be Rome, we need to take over that power, honor, glory, and authority for ourselves? And then have you seen any picture of a pope that was not dressed in bling? Right? That was so much worse than it is today. The church became so corrupt over history. You and I all live together in an apocalypse. I think that's why the show Fallout on Prime is doing so well, is there's a nice sense in everyone's heart we're living in the ruins of something. And the way out of the ruins is this drawing close to God. But let's talk about Black Friday for a second, because it's not just, we're not going to pick on Catholics. Anybody heard the story? Raise your hand. I'm actually curious, because this is what I heard growing up. It's called Black Friday because the sales at the stores are so good, the company is now in the black again. All finance people, they used to mark it down with pens instead of Excel spreadsheets, but if you're in the red, your company is going under. But now, thanks to Black Friday, we're in the black. That is the cute, antiquated retelling of history. There's two places I'm grateful I don't live. One is called Pittsburgh and one's called Philadelphia. City of brotherly love, I don't think you're going to get a hug there. If you get hugged, they have a knife and you won't have a wallet afterwards, right? So in the 1950s and 60s, this is the true origin story according to the best research I can find, which according to the algorithm might just be trying to control me, but I think this is the best we can fit together. Black Friday was called that because in these two cities of just brotherly love and affection and wonderful times in the 50s and 60s, they'd all go shopping after Thanksgiving, and then they'd go to an Army-Navy game. How many of you have been in the parking lot after an Army-Navy game? Only me. Okay, no one's happy to be there. The winning side's very happy, and the losing side's like, we've been trained in the use of deadly force. And it's just not a good vibe, right? You're there for the game, you want your team to win, but no one's a friendly rivalry does not exist. It is just a pure-blooded rivalry. So what happens in these cities, all the police officers are going, you know what day we hate the most? That Friday after Thanksgiving, because according to what I've found, they're all working 12-hour shifts due to the rioting, violence, traffic jams, and looting. That is Black Friday. And now we have the internet, so you can have Cyber Monday, and you don't have to punch someone like a 90s Christmas movie to get your kids a toy, right? But as today, with violence isn't really part of the problem, but it still helps continue to be mammon. If you have found good deals this week, once again, I'm not mocking you and saying you shouldn't have done that. I'm trying to help us see as a church that the air we're breathing is so inundated with this idea of this trustworthiness of money. It's like going up to a fish and saying, hey, what do you think about all the water that you live in? They'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about. It is so in the air in all culture across the world now that your financial success will be what matters. And sure, you got terrible places like China, where if you speak out against the government, they'll just kill you. But are there still Chinese billionaires? 100%. Does it seem the planet is going in a direction where the more money and control you have, you can transcend national boundaries and borders with you're a politician yourself? It seems to be the way things are going. And according to the Associated Press, it tracks all of our e-commerce, said U.S. consumers spent this year a record $11.8 billion online Friday, making a 9% jump from last year, and traffic particularly piled up over the last 10 hours when $12.5 million passed through online shopping carts every minute, totaling $11.8 billion. And this is a time when everyone on the news is trying to have you panicked and freak out and say the world's coming to an end, the United States is in disarray, it's all over. And we spent more money than ever because what is our money? It's our financial security, it is our peace, and it's our stability. It is the air that we breathe. And before someone's like, this liberal hippie needs to be quiet about capitalism, it's the best system we've had so far. So to clarify here, how did the French Revolution work out? A lot of people got decapitated. If you studied this in high school, I know Les Mis, and I'm not picking on the theater kids, but if you love Les Mis, they probably then went on to kill all the people they were singing with, right? Like the French Revolution was bloody and terrible, and you look at communism, fascism, Marxism, Nazism, social, all these programs across the planet, they don't listen to the fact that mammon sounds really good, and capitalism did. So we have more peace and prosperity than ever before. In Coffee and Franklin County alone, the poverty rate hovers around 15%. And think back to the Jewish audience hearing James. 80% of them are poor, and maybe 20% of them are wealthy. And they're like, we better go partner up with the wealthy people so we can feel secure in who we are. And James is saying, hey, wait a minute. And so one commentator put this. He says as he's studying the book of James, the problem is not that we've tried faith and found it wanting, but that we've tried mammon and found it addictive. And as a result, find following Christ inconvenient. It started with video games, it went into social media. You know, almost every company that tries to sell you anything has hired a team of people with doctorates in psychology to create an addictive system to get you hooked on something. And it's the air we breathe, and that's normal. But God is calling us out of that. So within this, people are really trying to prove the Beatles wrong, that money cannot buy love, right? Money can't buy me love is one of the most famous lines in a song ever. And people are like, hold my beer. I'm going to go prove you wrong. So looking back to the text, this church is tearing themselves apart over their selfish desires. But then he says this, and it's really harsh, especially in English. You adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God? I say it again, if you want to be a friend of the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. Do you think the scriptures have no meaning? They say that God is passionate. It literally says God is jealous. And in Exodus 25, that God is jealous. That is true of his creation. But it says passionate, that the spirit he has placed within us should be faithful to him. And he gives grace generously. As the scriptures say, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And so is it pretty weird to accuse your best friend of adultery if they just say, hey, we're not going to hang out on Tuesday? That seems a bit harsh and extreme, right? But back to biblical languages, the way they thought and spoke, the idea of friendship today is kind of sad, right? I have 797 friends on Facebook. Maybe 10 of them are like at this level of what biblical friendship is called to be. So think back, they're Jewish people, they know all these stories of their past. Anybody know the most famous friendship in all of the Old Testament? There's two guys that hung out so much, did so much together, named David and Jonathan. We mentioned David earlier because he was that start of the line of kings that seemed to be going all right. But David and Jonathan's friendship was so close, they'd committed themselves in a trust that superseded family lines. And that is biblical friendship. Not their own wives, not Jonathan's father, the first king Saul. No one would cause one to betray the other, and they committed to this friendship until the days they died. David grieved and mourned in a way that this friend had died. God designed you and I and all of us together for those types of friendships. That is the beauty that Jewish people hearing this message from James would have seen, that friendship with God is more than, hey, we talk sometimes. We text and get on Discord and hang out once a week and play the same games and watch the same shows. Also, speaking of shows, if you've seen Stranger Things Season 5, don't talk to me. I haven't seen it yet. I have two very small children. But as the Jewish people are hearing these stories, they hear this friendship of God is what we have to have. And that God is saying you are an enemy of God if you are friends with the world. And the world and the devil and ourselves are the three problems in spiritual warfare. Sometimes, and James brings up all three multiple chapters in a row, so I have to as well. If you're ever at a church and spiritual warfare is there's demons and you need holy water and you have to go fight them, that is 1/3 of spiritual warfare. The other aspect is found in your own heart. It is found in that world culture that Mammon seems to be running. It is out there, and he's saying that kind of love and friendship and commitment and loyalty unto death to that world system will not lead you to God. And it reminds us in the scriptures of something really beautiful. It's really uncomfortable, but it's pretty good. God opposes the proud. This is coming from Proverbs. I wrote it down in my notes somewhere. There it is, Proverbs 3:34. God opposes the proud. Does that mean God just doesn't like proud people? Does that mean like God would prefer we didn't be proud? God is in active opposition to the heart of a proud person at all times, because he's trying to teach us something beautiful here. God gives grace to the humble. And so the first point I want to see this morning of what God is calling all of us as a church family to is this: stop fighting to obtain things that make you feel good. And you're like, no, duh, Matt, we know. Black Friday just did record sales of all time, $12-something million a minute was spent because we think we can do this a different way. But God is telling us, stop fighting to obtain things that make you feel good. So let's keep going and find out about this grace for the humble, because he goes on and tells us really, really beautiful things. In verse 7, he goes on and tells us, so humble yourselves before God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Come close to God and God will come close to you. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world. Let there be tears for what you have done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Let there be sadness instead of laughter and gloom instead of joy. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up in honor. And you're like, Matt, that's pretty depressing. I have to go lament and mourn and go through this whole thing. But if you don't see the weight of your own sin, you will never be humble. He's not trying to say, go be an emo kid who cries all the time. Don't just sit around feeling bad about yourself, but see what God is calling you to. Turn away from your own selfishness and find that God is actually near you. Closeness to God is the way out of this world system that we seem to be stuck in. And it says something really great, that if you resist the devil, he will flee you. You don't have to fight Satan on a daily basis or any of his demons and figure out their names and start a prayer group to go fight a demon. You just simply need to turn to God and resist what Satan is telling you, and he will run. That is the easiest thing ever. The best example I have is my cousin Jessie, phenomenal woman. She now lives on the East Coast, but she was a single woman in a parking lot at a mall around Christmas time. Famously a great, super safe place for women to be in the dark, right? Luckily, she had just purchased a meat tenderizer as part of her purchases. And some guy follows her to her car. She didn't have to fight him. She bonked him once and he ran. Right? That is how you just put up the biggest resistance ever in a moment, and he goes running because he is a coward. But our God, we are going to draw near to him. And I understand that our social media problems and our cell phone addictions and all these other things in the world are causing us to be more anxious. But is it also possible that living in a world system about monetary worth and value at all times instead of drawing close to God is making us all freaked out? So this is going to be silly, but hear me out, okay? Because if closeness to God, if we come to him, he's going to come to us. Have you ever seen a grizzly bear with anxiety? Anybody? I don't care if it's in a zoo and depressed. Have you ever seen a grizzly bear that was worried? At all. And I know this is so silly. When you've been to a national park, anyone gone to a national park that has bears? Anyone seen the bear in person, like from far away, and you're like, that's good enough. There's no glass wall here. I'm going to stay back. You're going to stay back. If you see a bear cub and you want to hug it, what does the park ranger tell you the first thing about bears? If you see a lone bear cub, what do you not do? Touch it. Don't get near it because the mom is close by and it will eat you. Right? I've seen people on YouTube. Okay, I'm just going to drop that. Forget that, y'all. I saw a guy try to fight a bear once. The bear ran away because the armor was too scary. Anyway, that was Matt's ADHD, y'all. Sorry, we're bringing it back. So this whole idea, though, don't go near the bear cub because the mom is so close, you will be messed up. So in a world where you put our faith in mammon, people seem to be plagued by this anxiety, you can walk around in the confidence of a young grizzly bear because you know you're close to God. I love this quote from Narnia. Everyone should read their kids Narnia, please and thank you. But when the little girl asks, is the lion safe? The answer is no, but he's good. Get close to something that big, because if you get close to God, and he's coming close to you, some of you are like, I don't want that. If you saw what I did this week, please and no thank you. But if you get near to God, you are naturally going to wind up a lot more humble. I was sitting in a doctor's office, and it was a very qualified doctor recommended by people that I trust, and they had like 6 plaques on the wall, various awards, prestigious, XYZ. And I'm happy I went to him. Good doctor. I'll go again. But as I was looking at those awards, I'm like, it's kind of odd. If I know God, I have like a 3D printer, and like if I get a laser engraver, I could just make any of these awards and put them on my wall. Because at the end of the day, whether it's an Oscar or a Tony or anything we aspire to, it's a bunch of people making little stuff and handing it to each other that we ascribe all this value and meaning to. But if we draw near to God, all of that goes away. You're not going to worry about all these things. But we have a problem, though, because we're offering this drawing near to God, but we're growing into a culture and a world at all times where we want to fight about these things with money. How many of you have ever found out that you're asked about your net worth? Because you can ask someone, how much are you worth, and what's the answer going to be? What's your annual income, right? How much do you make a year? There's the people on the street interviews on TikTok and all these things that were like, they walk up to guys and girls like, well, how much does they need to make before you're going to go with them on a date somewhere? And they're like, oh, well, he needs to make $1.5 million. Like, they just want to know what your worth is on how much you make. They immediately know we're asking about how much they make and what is your worth. And just like a fish not aware of the water, we can't see this is the air that we're breathing. Think of that question again, outside the context of money. How much are you worth? Your paycheck's what's going to answer that question? That is impossible to answer with a paycheck. So when James calls for this sorrow and remorse and humility, that is the only path to those who are so desperately trying to find something that matters. Our only path to God is saying, hey, my value system is broken and wrong. It's led me into conflict with other people. If you've ever worked at a restaurant, raise your hand. I love working at restaurants. I think it should be like everyone should just have to do it for a year. If you serve tables and you get the bad section on a Saturday night, are you going to try to leave early? Every time, because you're going to make no money. Whoever got that good station shows up half an hour early and just stay, like they don't complain because they're making $400 more than you and they know it. But in all of this, he's saying, hey, out of that jealousy in your own heart, because then do you start liking people that have more than you, or do you start disliking people that have more than you? It's really easy to start disliking them and looking for their flaws and problems. And this is to a church where 80% of them were on the line of poverty. And as one commentator once said, that poverty hides a myriad of sins. So whether you're the richest or the poorest person in the room, James is trying to get us all to come back to this simple gospel truth of we come to God with nothing. Last week, it was the silly illustration that if you're in a long jump competition over the Grand Canyon, it doesn't matter how far you get. You fall and you die. And so we're not yet to our second point, and I know that's weird, but James seems a little disconnected, but I promise he's all working on this idea, because he goes on, he tells them, verse 11, don't speak evil against each other, dear brothers and sisters. If you criticize and judge each other, then you are criticizing and judging God's law. But your job is to obey the law, not to judge whether it applies to you. If you really want to follow all of Levitical law, this is not your Bible verse, okay? Christ came to fulfill the law, but he made all of the 10 Commandments a little bit more interesting. Next year, we're going to start in a series where we look to see how we find the gospel truth in the 10 Commandments and try to see God's grace and his nature and his goodness. But in this fulfillment of God's law and the obedience of what he calls us to do, God alone who gave the law is judge. He alone has the power to save or destroy, so what right do you have to judge your neighbor? So he starts with people in the church, and then he says outside of that as well. So this part here, verse 11, he's showing our common temptation to put our own morality above God's morality. And in doing so, we made ourselves out to be in need of the gospel because we think those people over there have the problem. So how many of you think you have a pride problem? No one's going to raise their hand? That's okay. If you think you have a pride problem, good, you're in the right place. We all do. If you don't think you have a pride problem, let's just do a quick heart self-check here. We should pray and ask God to reveal the things in our hearts, but in this moment, here's the questions. Do you have any of these heart symptoms? I don't care what people group go into your mind, what political party, what affiliation. Do you have any contempt in your heart for fill-in-the-blank kind of person over there? Are you in denial of your own need for God? And that looks like this. You can't see your own neediness because no one likes to be needy. You put a premium value on independence. How many of you like being independent? Every one of us, because we're the United States of America and we beat up the British. We won, guys. We get to be independent. Let's have Independence Day, which I will continue to celebrate. But no, if you have this thing in your heart that you have put a premium above all else on your own independence, that is pride. And finally, you have no recognition of your own sin. And I don't want anyone to walk away today going, I have secret sins that I really got to figure out, and it's a puzzle. Just go to God, ask him to do it. But if you spend a week or a month or a year going, yeah, I really haven't sinned much this year, I'm doing pretty great, your pride is lying to you. That's why James tells you throughout this book, do not be deceived by yourself. But this is what James is getting at. If the gospel isn't central to your heart, or if the gospel is central to your heart, it will change how you speak about fellow Christians and literal neighbors. So if you have people in your neighborhood, and I know in the South we kind of like, we'll just be friendly, and we'll never make it past the front porch. We want to get past the front porch, because you might be the only person that loves God that they talk to. But if you think your fellow Christians and your literal neighbors are the problem, we're in trouble. And sometimes there's heresy, there's wrong teaching in the church, but how many of you have seen people say something about Jesus in the YouTube comment section? And then people argue and debate and name call, and those same people are going to wind up in the same heaven. Because if you submit and follow to Christ, it doesn't matter if you mess up on some of the other stuff. But coming back to this is what James is trying to get at, that we can come close to God in humility. That is the only avenue. You cannot get close to God by saying, God, look at all the great things that I've done, love me more. That is antithetical to the gospel message. So first off, we have to stop fighting to obtain things that make us feel good. And second, we have to come close to God in humility. So if this is true, that our God is calling us to escape a worldwide belief system, that personal satisfaction and our financial security will satisfy us, we might run into some objections, right? How many of you have met an incredibly wealthy person that was also really kind, and you're like, oh, they seem okay. They exist. James will say some very harsh things about rich people in chapter 5, but we've met some good ones that love the Lord, see their money as a tool for the kingdom. But someone might come along and say, yeah, your old book of old stories that Jewish people kind of believed but kind of didn't, I don't buy into it. So I have a legacy and a success that matters. I have statues and monuments and billions of dollars. I have started a space program because I guess that's what billionaires do now. We're just going to have 57 different competing space programs, right? I'm going to help colonize all the different planets. I'm going to build a legacy that reaches to the stars. James is going to get to that in a moment, but every single one of those things is going away. This is a little bit nerdy, but bear with me. We're going to pick back up in a second. How many of you ever heard of the heat death of the universe? Really nerdy, right? Okay, so according to leading scientists of any belief system you can find, the way entropy works, everything is going into chaos and disorder. Every source of heat in the known universe will go away. The sun will run out of whatever fire logs that God threw into it to start it up, and then we will just have no more sun. And it'll happen all across, everywhere, and life itself will completely end. And we have the math to prove it. And that's what they're saying is coming one day. So according to that, does anything else actually matter? It's not even in the Bible. Everybody knows everything goes away. The only thing that will matter, the only way that we can matter forever is to be as humble as God calls us to be. That is the only way into eternal destiny and glory and the things that matter. Because he says in verse 13, look here, you who say today or tomorrow we are going to a certain town and will stay there a year. We will do business there and make a profit. In 2025, that just sounds like good business practice, right? Our church has an annual fiscal plan, and we meet to plan the annual fiscal year. That is the air we're breathing. This is the way the world has started when Jesus was here and is continuing to go into the future, because again, we're going to wind up in Revelation here in a second. We're saying here, we're going to go today, we're going to set up in a town, we're going to make a lot of money, and then we're going to come on home. That's just good business sense. But is this God condemning the American business model? And the answer is sort of. Because he goes on in 14, he says, how do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, then it's gone. So how many of you have driven over Tim's Ford where there's some fog? Was it there when you came back? No. That is what God is saying. In the scheme of things in our lives, you're making all of these grandiose plans saying what's going to happen, and I'm in charge, and I am my own independent person outside of anything, and here is where it's going to go. But in verse 15, he says, what you ought to say is if the Lord wants us to, we will live and do this or that. Otherwise, you are boasting about your own pretentious plans, and all such boasting is evil. Remember, it is sin to know what you ought to do and then not do it. But there's this weird idea that God is king and we are not. We are going to worship a king for all Christmas season. One of my favorite lines from a Christian band they said, fall on your knees before the king and he will wash your feet. I think that's a beautiful thing to keep in mind, is that we go to God in that humility, but he's the one that does the work and changes us. I think that's valuable to remember with this king. But this final thing he's saying is stop chasing your own legacy. Get rid of the pride and the arrogance that makes you think you're going to build something that matters. There are people born, I'm trying to think of someone I can quote that's going to split the room in half. Jane Goodall recently passed away, and I have nothing but respect for that woman and her study of the gorillas. Raise your hand if you had known who she was before I said gorillas. About half. All young people are like, who on earth? A couple of younger people, thank you. But anyway, there was this nice old lady who started as a young lady who really liked gorillas and studied them her entire life. She made a lasting legacy in science and endeavors, and most of what she'd done, I think it's really helpful. I think it was probably fun too. If I just got to hang out with giant things that get buff off of eating grass, sounds like a fun time. I have to eat a lot of things and exercise because I'm not in it right now. But she just got to have this fun time with gorillas. She made this lasting impact, and within a generation, no one's going to know her name. Yes, we have the internet, but how many of you have seen more AI slop in the past 2 weeks than you ever thought possible? It's not going to get better. My new rule with Facebook is when I turn it on and the second thing I see is an AI slop video, I just close the entire app and I'm like, next, something to do today that's real. But we are in a place where we have no more cultural stories. We have no more value system outside of, doesn't matter if you're a Chinese billionaire or an American billionaire or a German billionaire, you're in a club that's on a system that runs on your security and profit. And God is saying, stop chasing that legacy. Live in my sovereignty. So I promised that when we said we're going to look at the grand story, we have to look at Revelation here. We have to look at something a little bit weird. Because this is the God who is outside of space and time warning us what's going to happen next before the new heaven and the new earth are brought into glory and we are feeling like we're back in the garden. How many of you remember being 5 years old and just happy to be at a Thanksgiving because you didn't know what they were fighting about? There was just good food and you got to hug grandma. Right? That just felt good. And then in 2025, you're like, if one person brings up politics, I'm going to hit him with this wine bottle. Right? Like we've gone to being insecure in our own family gatherings. We long to return to that sense of presence and true closeness. That is what God designed us for. But then this weird thing, because John prophesies about what's going to happen next. And this is going to get weird, y'all, because it's Revelation. But according to John in this prophecy, then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performed great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that is allowed to work in the presence of the beast to deceive those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image of the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. So far, standard Revelation, right? This is pretty like, there's dragons, there's sheep, there's talking things, it's wacky, we're in there. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Right back to the French Revolution. If you're not in line with this New World Order, we're going to decapitate you. I don't know how they'll do it, but that's the plan. But then here's the odd part, right? This is all standard Revelation. And this part you might get freaked out about, but I'll calm us down. He says, also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, and if that sounds like the words of James and Paul for what the church is, it's for a reason, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Isn't that a really weird thing, right? Imagine you're watching The Lord of the Rings, and then suddenly the Balrog stops to talk to you about venture market capitalism. That'd be pretty weird. You're watching Harry Potter, and Voldemort, instead of stopping doing the evil, he's like, let me tell you about a Roth IRA account. Do you guys see that disconnect, right? There's this fantastical language, these crazy things are happening, and then you won't be able to buy stuff and participate in local market economy. That's really weird. Is it possible that in this call for wisdom, this looking at the things, it's less about whether or not that Bluetooth in your ear is going to be the mark of the beast or not? That's not what you're looking for. But is it possible that this account of the beast and the mark are these fantastical descriptions of beasts and dragons and the end of the world as we know it? But the biggest thing is the mark of the beast allows them to keep worshiping mammon. Without this mark and submission to the Antichrist, you cannot have the security you always thought you had. Your 401ks are now worthless unless you submit to this. So maybe that's why that's one of the first things Jesus warned about in the Sermon on the Mount. He knew that we were going to invent a lot of fun, cool things, y'all. He knew we were going to talk to AI, and it's probably not good for us. But he knew all of this was going to come about. He knew we would continue to invent things where the world gets smaller and smaller because we can text someone in Siberia and find out how much it is for a rug if you have a good Google translation software in there, right? God knew that we were heading towards this one world government because it was going to start with a one world economy and a one world belief that money is my security. And in the United States, that has worked well, right? Can you buy a smart lock and then give combinations to friends and family to get into your house? It's great. I love that. That's fantastic technology that money has purchased me and all of these things. And like we said, these systems are all going in a way downhill. But he warned the Western church about mammon for a reason. Christendom's already gone. We're living in the ruins and saying, isn't these nice cathedrals that they built on the English coasts, aren't they lovely? They're now museums. But do you think it's ironic that now we have Black Friday, which is the most important day of the year in the American financial calendar, because that is when we spent $12.8 million a minute buying. And again, if you did it too, it's okay, you got a good deal on that pet bed, okay? I'm just trying to help us see the culture is the problem and we're fighting against it, okay? This is just a wake-up call together. But is it possible that we got so busy fighting about whether or not they said Xmas or Christmas? What's the real reason Christmas is as popular as it is in the United States? Is it Jesus? Long gone. Long gone is the day where Christmas is about Jesus. It is about what do I get and how good is it going to be? And we forgot that we've abandoned the point of God humbling himself not only by becoming a small child, but by humbling himself to the point of death on a cross. That is why Christmas matters. That is why James is saying you are living in a system where you are ready to fight and kill just like the people in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia to get a good deal after an Army-Navy game because you want it for yourself. And the world is coming where you can have everything your heart desires as long as you have enough money. Jesus did remind us that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And it says that's where your heart will be. What is the only way to get to heaven? Being in Christ. If your heart is in what you have, in your plans, in this world system, you are not in Christ. I'm not in Christ. We have to see here, he's saying, stop fighting to obtain the things that make you feel good. Come close to God in humility. Stop chasing your own legacy. This is the way out, everybody. This doesn't mean, hey, this year we're not buying presents and we're going to stop buying Disney products and the system is going to win, just bluntly. We live, according to this book, in a world that's fallen, and until Jesus shows up to take over again, it's in trouble. But there's beautiful moments, there's opportunities to work at an outpost of the kingdom, but our God is calling us to escape this worldwide belief system. Jesus called it mammon. We call it the market economy, and it's going to win. Smart people are already like, I wonder how the Antichrist is going to use the AI to subjugate us all, right? We saw Terminator and we just laughed at it and said, next. But if this is what he's calling us to do, what does James tell the church? What is God's heart? Because this was 2,000 years ago. He says that the church should be a place where we talk about others well, that we use our words to build up and not destroy, and a church that cares for the poor. This is an interesting stat. I said that it's really good that in Franklin Coffee County, 15%-ish is about the poverty level. Odd stat, 20% of children in Coffee in Franklin County are at the poverty level. That means there's some dads that pieced out. That means there are still people we should be looking for and serving in our counties and our communities today. As we be going in wisdom and peace. You can sing the song, It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine, as a Christian and mean it. You can have wisdom and peace on earth this Christmas season, regardless of the way the world system goes, by saying, hey, I didn't realize this was in the air, but let's pursue our God in prayer. You can walk around with the confidence of a grizzly bear cub. They're not freaked out because they know they're close. If you know you're close to God, who is not safe, there is no politician, there is no world system. If the Holocaust couldn't ever stop God, nothing will. If the atom bomb didn't stop God, nothing will. We can be close to that God forever. If we come close to God, he will come close to us. So this morning, if you need to take a moment and say, hey, that humility bit doesn't sound good, but he might be right. Jeff Bezos might not be winning Monopoly. Whoever the richest person you can think of in your high school, because there's always that one rich kid, right? Whoever the richest person at your work is, whoever owns the company, whoever shows up with the better car, if we look out there and say, man, if I had that, then I will be better off. According to James, because he brought up the devil earlier, that's a lie from hell. But if we resist the devil, he will flee from us. So before we take communion, if you need to take a time to pray in your heart and say, Lord, I've kind of bought into this. I think my way out of X, Y, and Z is if I work hard, get a good job, do enough money, have 2.5 children, pull myself up by my own bootstraps, then it'll work. It will not. It will leave you crushed and unsatisfied, jealous, envious, and plotting evil against other people. I'm not going to say the name of the, actually I will. Think of us as a church. However big we get, however we keep growing and fixing things up and adding things everywhere. There was a church in Texas and they found money in the walls. Because they had so much money, we had to stuff it in the walls. And then a flood came and hit Texas and that church said, sorry, no one can stay in our building. That is the majority of Christian culture in the United States. We get the money, security. If we get enough people, we'll obviously build more stuff. We have room, we'll expand, we'll do that kind of thing. But if the priority of God's people becomes the security that mammon offers us, it's going to end. The greed always kills. Why is Christendom gone? I'll still say this day, the number one reason is the Roman Catholic Church decided power, authority, and money was the answer, and not Jesus. We'll still teach his name, but we lost hope. So once again, guys, we're going to take that communion, but if you want to walk around in an anxious world, maybe come close to God. And if you said, hey, there's a lot of sins that he's going to tell me to stop doing, that's between you and God. And when you start doing that, you can walk in the light with other people. We had 12 guys get together for like 6 weeks, and every single dude that shared the stuff they were actually dealing with, no one walked away feeling worse. They realized there's other people in those same struggles, those same problems. So even if you have a problem with pride and money and control that's killing you, God's not going to say you're too far gone. If you draw near to him, if you come close to him, he will be near you. So let's pray and take communion.